The asphalt of Highway 17 unspooled into the damp, pine-heavy dark of coastal Virginia like a ribbon of obsidian. At 11:42 p.m., the night was thick with a low-hanging humidity that clung to the windshield of the charcoal-gray SUV. Behind the wheel sat Commander Malcolm Vance, a man whose entire existence was calibrated by the uncompromising standards of discipline, precision, and an unspoken, marrow-deep devotion to the Republic. Malcolm was exhausted. It was a dense, heavy fatigue that settled into the bone, the inevitable tax of 3 consecutive days of high-level strategic briefings at the Naval Amphibious Base. He was still in full-dress uniform, choker white, crisp, and immaculate. The fabric was unyielding, a stiff mantle adorned with the Navy Cross, the Silver Star, and the golden trident pinned over his heart. He was a man in his late 30s, possessing a quiet, imposing physicality. He had the wide shoulders and steady gaze of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to command a room. His presence alone established the perimeter. Tonight, however, he was just a man who wanted to go home, kiss his sleeping wife, and slip into a quiet, dreamless sleep. Then, the piercing glare of red and blue LED lights shattered the quiet darkness of his rearview mirror. Malcolm's pulse didn't spike. His breathing remained a rhythmic, deliberate cycle. Men who have been fast-roped into hostile territories under the absolute black of a new moon do not panic over a traffic stop on a domestic highway. He calmly activated his turn signal, smoothly guiding the heavy SUV onto the wide gravel shoulder. He placed the vehicle in park, cut the engine, and immediately illuminated the interior dome light. Finally, he placed both of his large, steady hands squarely at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel. Standard procedure. He had absolutely nothing to hide. Behind him, the local police cruiser idled aggressively close, its high beams boring into his tailgate. Inside the cruiser sat 2 officers from the county precinct. The driver, Officer Clint Maddox, was a man whose career was defined by a fragile ego and a documented history of civilian complaints, each one conveniently buried beneath the protective bureaucracy of a sympathetic local union. Maddox carried a chip on his shoulder the size of a cinder block, a perpetual resentment toward a world he believed owed him a deference he had never earned. In the passenger seat was Officer Caleb Thorne, a rookie barely 6 months out of the academy. Thorne was still idealistic, his uniform stiff, his palms prone to sweating when the night turned unpredictable. "Look at this guy," Maddox sneered, unbuckling his seatbelt with a sharp click. "Tinted windows out here at midnight. Probably trafficking." "Tints look legal to me, Clint," Thorne offered mildly, his fingers dancing over the mobile data terminal. "Plates are clean, registered to a Malcolm Vance. No warrants, no flags. It's a ghost record." "Yeah, well, he clipped the fog line a mile back. Let's see what we're dealing with," Maddox replied. He drew his heavy maglite from its ring, stepping out into the soup-thick night air. Maddox approached the SUV with an exaggerated heavy-heeled swagger, his right hand resting casually but purposefully on the butt of his sidearm. He bypassed the rear quarter panel and stopped just behind the driver's side pillar. Raising the heavy metal flashlight, he rapped it hard against the glass, a sharp, aggressive clack, 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 engineered specifically to startle. Malcolm didn't flinch. He slowly pressed the switch, rolling down the window to let the humid air mix with the air-conditioned cabin, revealing the stark contrast of his bright dome light against the pitch-black highway. "Evening, officer," Malcolm said. His voice was a deep, calm baritone, perfectly level. Maddox didn't answer. Instead, he jammed the high-beam flashlight directly into Malcolm's eyes, an old textbook intimidation tactic meant to disorient and dominate. "License, registration, and proof of insurance. Now." Malcolm squinted slightly, turning his head just a fraction to protect his night vision from the blinding glare. "My wallet is in my back right pocket, officer. My registration is in the glove compartment. I am reaching for my wallet first." Maddox lowered the beam slightly, and for the first time, the light caught the stark brilliance of what the man was wearing. The pristine white uniform, the gleaming brass buttons, the rows of colorful ribbons representing campaigns fought in shadows, and the unmistakable gold of the seal trident. Maddox wasn't a military man, but he recognized authority, and more dangerously, he recognized when someone outranked him in the silent social hierarchy of the world. Instead of professional courtesy, a hot flash of irrational resentment washed over the patrolman. Here was a black man sitting in a luxury vehicle, draped in a uniform that demanded a level of institutional respect Maddox felt he himself was perpetually denied. "You in the military?" Maddox asked, his tone dripping with a bizarre, unearned condescension. "Yes, officer. I am a commander in the United States Navy," Malcolm replied evenly. He kept his left hand clearly visible on the wheel, while his right moved with agonizing slowness toward his rear pocket, extracting a slim leather wallet. He passed his driver's license and military ID through the open window. Maddox snatched the cards, his thumb dragging across the laminated surface of the military ID. He looked at the photo, then back at the man in the white collar. "Commander, huh? Where you coming from at this hour?" "Naval Amphibious Base. I'm heading home." "You swerved back there," Maddox lied, his eyes narrowing. "Have you been drinking tonight?" "I have not had a drop of alcohol, officer. I've been in command briefings since 9 this morning." "Step out of the vehicle," Maddox ordered suddenly, taking a swift step back and unlatching the thumb brake on his holster. Across the roof of the vehicle, Officer Thorne froze. He had just walked up to the passenger side, his flashlight illuminating the empty leather seats. He looked across the roof at his partner, confusion turning to a sudden, cold dread. Step out for what? There was no smell of intoxicants, no slurred speech, no erratic movements, and zero probable cause. Malcolm's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He knew the statutory limits of a traffic stop. He knew this was an unlawful order, born entirely from a small man's wounded vanity. But he also knew the grim, lethal statistics of the world outside the base gates. A uniform and a high rank were not magical shields against a hollow-point bullet on a dark, lonely stretch of highway. "Officer, I am complying with your request," Malcolm said, his voice remaining terrifyingly steady, carrying the weight of a man who spent his life managing calculated risks. "But I want to state for the record that I have done nothing to warrant this exit." "I said step out of the damn car!" Maddox barked, his voice cracking slightly as the first hits of unearned adrenaline flooded his system. Malcolm slowly reached for the internal door handle. The heavy door of the SUV swung open, and Commander Malcolm Vance stepped out onto the gravel shoulder. Even without his combination cover on, he stood at a towering 6'3". In the crisp white dress uniform, with his broad shoulders and flawless posture, he looked like a monument forged from bronze and discipline. Maddox, who stood at 5'9" with a thickening waistline shifting beneath his tactical vest, instantly felt physically eclipsed. The psychological shift was immediate and volatile. Maddox's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt the illusion of control slipping through his fingers, even though the giant in front of him had done nothing but obey every command. "Turn around and face the vehicle. Put your hands on the roof," Maddox shouted, his heels digging into the dirt as he drew his yellow X-26 taser, painting the twin red laser sights squarely onto the center of Malcolm's back, directly over the ribbons of the Navy Cross. Thorne rushed around the rear bumper of the SUV, his hands raised in a frantic, placating gesture. "Clint! Whoa! Hold on! Wait a minute! He's complying, man. He's good. We have his ID right there." "Back off, Caleb!" Maddox yelled, his eyes wide, fixed entirely on the broad white back of the commander. "He's being non-compliant. Face the car." Malcolm stopped. He did not place his hands on the metal roof. Instead, he kept his hands raised in the air, open-palmed at shoulder height. Turning his head just enough to keep Maddox in his peripheral vision, He spoke with the voice of a man accustomed to commanding hundreds of elite operators in life-or-death theaters. "Officer Maddox," Malcolm said, his eyes finding the small silver name tape on the cop's vest. "Look at my hands. They are empty. I am a commissioned officer in the United States military. I am unarmed. You are pointing a weapon at me without legal cause. De-escalate this situation right now." It was the tone of absolute command that broke Maddox's fragile psyche. Maddox was used to fear. He extracted it from the people he pulled over in this county. But Malcolm Vance wasn't afraid of him. Malcolm was looking at him the way an adult looks at a toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery aisle. "Don't you tell me how to do my job, you piece of—" Maddox caught himself, but the venom was already airborne. "I said hands on the car! Spread your legs!" "I am going to slowly place my hands on the roof of the car," Malcolm narrated, prioritizing his survival over his pride, ensuring every movement was forecasted. He began to pivot his body back toward the SUV. As he turned, the lower hem of his stiff dress jacket caught slightly on the rough fabric of his trousers. Instinctively, and with deliberate slowness, Malcolm's right hand drifted down a few inches to smooth the jacket, a habit drilled into every sailor since boot camp to maintain the immaculate symmetry of the dress whites. "He's reaching!" Maddox screamed. It was the magic phrase, the institutional get-out-of-jail-free card. Pop. The sound was shockingly loud in the stillness of the coastal night. Two metallic prongs shot from the taser cartridge on a pair of thin, trailing copper wires. They slammed into Malcolm's back, the barbed hooks embedding deep into the layers of the heavy white uniform, puncturing the skin near his shoulder blade and lower spine. The device discharged 50,000 volts of electricity directly into Commander Vance's central nervous system. Malcolm's entire body locked instantly. The human body is an intricate electrical machine, and Maddox had just introduced lightning to the circuit. Every muscle group seized with enough violent force to threaten bone. A guttural, involuntary groan tore from Malcolm's throat as his spine went completely rigid. He tipped backward like a felled oak, crashing heavily onto the sharp, unforgiving gravel of the shoulder. His head bounced sickeningly against the asphalt edge of the lane. The immaculate white uniform was instantly ruined, stained with the black mud of the highway ditch and the sudden dark bloom of blood from his shoulder and temple. "Clint, what the living hell are you doing?" Thorne screamed, rushing forward in absolute horror. He grabbed his partner's vest, trying to pull him back. "He wasn't reaching. He was fixing his coat. Cuff him! Cuff him now!" Maddox roared, his face flushed red, his finger locked on the trigger to deliver a second, excruciating 5-second cycle of electricity into the downed officer. Malcolm convulsed on the gravel, his jaw locked so hard that one of his molars fractured under the pressure. Yet, through the blinding haze of neuromuscular incapacitation, the deep-seated reservoirs of his training overrode the panic of the flesh. He didn't fight the air. He didn't flail. He knew with absolute certainty that any erratic movement would be met with lead bullets instead of copper wires. Thorne practically tackled Maddox, throwing his weight into his partner's chest to force the taser down. "Stop it! Cut the power!" Thorne dropped to his knees in the gravel beside Malcolm. The commander was gasping for oxygen, his vision swimming with gray fractures, every nerve ending screaming in protest. Thorne's hands shook so violently he could barely unlatch his handcuffs. Sir, I'm sorry. I have to put these on you. Please don't move." Malcolm offered no resistance as the cold steel ratcheted tightly around his wrists, the metal biting deep into his skin. Maddox stood over them, his chest heaving, a toxic mixture of adrenaline-fueled triumph and dawning terror competing in his eyes. He had won the physical confrontation, but as his gaze drifted down to the gold trident gleaming under the high beams, the cold reality of the world outside his county lines began to settle in. "Get him in the back of the cruiser," Maddox spat, trying to piece his authority back together. "Resisting arrest. Assault on a police officer." Thorne looked up from the dirt, his face twisted in pure disgust. "Assault? Are you losing your mind, Clint? The body cams are synced. He didn't touch you. You just tased a Navy SEAL commander." "I gave him an order," Maddox yelled back, though his voice had lost its granite edge, wavering into a thin, defensive reed. They hauled Malcolm to his feet. His legs were numb, dragging through the gravel. His uniform was ruined, his temple leaking a steady stream of crimson down his neck. They shoved him into the hard, molded plastic back seat of the cruiser, his long legs cramped into the restricted space. As the heavy door slammed shut, sealing him in the darkness, Malcolm Vance sat perfectly still. He closed his eyes, took a deep, tactical 4-count breath to steady his heart rate, and opened them again. His eyes were no longer those of a tired officer trying to get home. They were cold, calculating, and dangerously quiet. Officer Clint Maddox had no idea what kind of fuse he had just lit. The county precinct house was a drab, single-story cinder-block structure that smelled of industrial floor wax, stale tobacco, and cheap coffee. It was a remarkably slow Tuesday night, right up until the double doors at the back of the booking area swung open, and Malcolm Vance was marched inside. The entire bullpen went dead silent. Desk sergeants, deputies processing paperwork, and civilian clerks stopped mid-motion. Malcolm's white dress uniform was a battlefield of mud, gravel, and blood. His hands were pinned behind his back. Yet he walked with a spine like a steel girder, his chin held parallel to the floor, looking directly ahead. He didn't look like a suspect being processed. He looked like a captured sovereign being led through a provincial outpost. "Put him in holding cell 3, Maddox ordered, his voice echoing too loudly in the sudden quiet. He was trying to project the image of a man handling business, but he could feel every eye in the room burning into his back. "I'm going to the break room to draft the narrative." "You want me to log him into the system, Clint?" asked Sergeant Mac Connolly, a veteran deputy whose eyes were fixed entirely on the ruined white jacket and the gold insignia pinned to the chest. Connolly had done 4 years with the 1st Marine Division in Helmand Province. He knew exactly what that trident meant, and the color was rapidly draining from his weathered face. "Maddox, what the hell did you do out there?" "He was combative during a stop," Maddox snapped, turning his back on the desk. "Just lock him down." They escorted Malcolm into the concrete box of cell 3 and removed the cuffs. Malcolm didn't rub his wrists. He didn't voice a single complaint. He simply turned to face the iron bars, looking directly into Maddox's eyes before the patrolman could turn away. "I am entitled to my phone call," Malcolm said, his baritone voice cutting through the ambient hum of the precinct. "By federal law and by the Uniform Code of Military Justice, as I am an active duty officer detained under highly irregular circumstances," Maddox scoffed, though it lacked conviction. "You'll get your call when I'm done with the initial paperwork, Chief." He turned on his heel and disappeared into the back corridor. Officer Thorne, however, didn't move. He remained by the bars, looking physically ill. "Sir," he whispered, checking his shoulder to ensure they were out of earshot of the main desk. I don't even know what to say. I'm writing my report exactly as it happened. My camera was live the whole time. He was out of line." Malcolm looked at the young officer, reading the raw terror and the moral conflict written across his face. "Officer Thorne," Malcolm said softly, "I appreciate your conscience, but right now you need to hand me that phone. Because if I miss my secure check-in with the Base Operations Center in exactly 35 minutes, the United States Navy will initiate a missing asset protocol, and you do not want them tracking me to this coordinate." Thorne swallowed hard, his throat clicking. He walked over to the booking desk, ignored the warning glare from Sergeant Connolly, unhooked the wireless receiver from the wall, and brought it back to the cell, sliding it through the iron gaps. "Make it fast, sir," Thorne whispered. Malcolm dialed a secure 11-digit number from memory. It wasn't to a local defense attorney, and it wasn't to his home. It was the direct, encrypted line to the Base Security Operations Center at the amphibious base. The line rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. Operations Petty Officer Center. State your designation. Center, this is Commander Malcolm Vance. Authorization code Delta Sigma 902. A momentary pause on the other end, followed by the rapid clack of a mechanical keyboard. Commander, code verified. Your personal beacon is pinging off-site, approximately 12 miles north of the perimeter. What is your status, sir? I am currently confined within the county precinct house off Highway 17. I was subjected to an unlawful traffic stop, assaulted with a neuromuscular incapacitation device while fully compliant, and detained without probable cause by local authorities. I am requesting immediate extraction and immediate JAG representation. The silence on the line was profound, a sudden suspension of breath. Then, the entire tone of the operation shifted from administrative routine to combat alert. Sir, you were tased? Affirmative, 2 cycles. Are you injured, Commander? Minor lacerations to the cranium, secondary muscular tremors. Nothing that compromises operational capacity. Secure the line. Copy that, Commander. Hold your position. Waking the Admiral now. The cavalry is spinning up. 10 miles down the coastline, within the heavily fortified perimeter of the naval base, a red strobe began to pulse silently in the darkness of the Joint Operations Center. Master Chief Max Stryker, the head of military police and base tactical security, was wide awake before his phone completed its second vibration cycle. Stryker was a mountain of a man, a 30-year veteran with skin like tanned leather and a reputation for treating the safety of his personnel as a holy commandment. He snatched the encrypted handset from his nightstand. Stryker, talk. Master Chief, we have a situation Alpha. Commander Vance has been detained by local civilian PD off Highway 17. Early telemetry indicates he was assaulted and tased by a county unit while in full dress uniform. Stryker sat upright in his bed, the last remnants of sleep instantly incinerated by a cold, searing fury. Vance wasn't just an officer, he was a legacy operator, a man who had bled in gray zones that didn't exist on any map for the sake of the people sleeping soundly in that very county. And some local badge-heavy cowboy had dropped him in his dress whites. Wake Vice Admiral Sterling, Stryker ordered, his voice dropping into a dangerous gravelly register as he pulled on his combat boots. And wake the quick reaction team. Get the heavy armor rolling. Master Chief, you want the QRT for a local precinct house? I want 2 Bearcats, a full complement of masters-at-arms in heavy kit, and the duty JAG officer, Stryker barked, snapping his Sig Sauer sidearm into its thigh holster. These local boys think they can cage a naval commander like a stray dog. They're about to get a lesson in federal sovereignty. Mobilize them now. Within 15 minutes, the quiet base was vibrating with the low rumble of heavy diesel engines. Inside the command center, Vice Admiral Charles Sterling, a stern, gray-haired strategist with 3 decades of command decisions etched into his face, stood before a digital map displaying Malcolm Vance's active GPS coordinates. Admiral, Master Chief Stryker said, stepping into the light of the monitors, fully geared in black ceramic plate and carrying a tactical clipboard. The convoy is staged at the main gate. We are ready to breach the civil perimeter. Admiral Sterling looked at the blinking blue dot on the map, then turned his gaze to Stryker. Master Chief, this requires precision. We aren't going to war with a domestic municipality, but I will not allow one of my senior commanders to be degraded by a rogue precinct. Do you understand? Perfectly, sir. We overwhelm them with presence, not ordnance. We walk in, we secure our commander, and we leave the local authorities to deal with the ashes tomorrow morning. Sterling nodded slowly, his expression grim. Go get our boy, Master Chief. Take full control of that deck. Back at the county precinct, Clint Maddox sat in the break room, a paper cup of stale coffee shaking slightly in his grip. The initial rush of self-righteous adrenaline had evaporated, leaving behind the cold, heavy realization of what he had actually done. He was trying to figure out how to frame his report to make a 6'3" Navy commander look like an imminent lethal threat while his hands were at shoulder height. He didn't hear the low, bass-heavy thrum of diesel engines approaching from the south. He didn't see the thick coastal fog split apart as 3 massive black up-armored Lenco Bearcats turned into the precinct's gravel parking lot, their high-intensity LED light bars slicing through the mist like surgical lasers. The vehicles came to a synchronized stop, completely blocking every exit and entrance to the building. The heavy run-flat tires ground over the loose stones with a sound like crushing bone. Inside, Sergeant Connolly paused mid-sentence as the floorboards began to vibrate. The coffee in his mug rippled in perfect concentric circles. It felt like a minor seismic event or a freight train running directly through the lobby. Connolly stood up, his old military instincts screaming, and walked toward the reinforced glass doors of the front entrance. His breath caught in his throat. The steel side doors of the Bearcats swung open in unison. Out poured 12 Navy Masters-at-Arms, clad in full black tactical gear, ballistic helmets, and body armor. They moved with a terrifying, silent efficiency. No shouting, no chaotic running. They operated as a single, multi-headed organism, immediately establishing a hard perimeter around the building, their M4 carbines held at the low ready. The double-glass doors of the precinct lobby were thrown open so hard the metal frames slammed against the concrete walls. Master Chief Max Stryker stepped into the fluorescent light. He looked like an absolute force of nature, his silver anchor insignias gleaming on his collar, his eyes locked straight ahead. Flanking him was Lieutenant Commander Ethan Hayes, the duty JAG officer, carrying a sleek leather briefcase and wearing an expression of unyielding legal authority. Connolly instinctively snapped to attention behind his high desk, his throat going completely dry. "I am Master Chief Stryker, United States Navy," his voice boomed, a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to strip the oxygen from the room. "And I am here to secure Commander Malcolm Vance, who is currently the senior ranking officer in this facility." The 3 deputies sitting in the bullpen froze, their pens hovering over their desks, their eyes darting from Stryker to the heavily armed operators standing just beyond the glass. Hearing the deep voice, Clint Maddox swaggered back out of the corridor, a half-eaten pastry in one hand and a defensive scowl plastered across his face. But the scowl vanished the instant his eyes registered the black wall of body armor filling his lobby. "What the hell is this?" Maddox demanded, his voice cracking into a high register as his hand drifted toward his utility belt. Stryker's eyes locked onto him. The air pressure in the room seemed to plummet. The Master Chief took 3 slow, deliberate strides across the linoleum, closing the distance until he was towering directly over the patrolman. "Move your hand away from your sidearm, officer," Stryker said, his voice dropping to a lethal, quiet whisper. "If you unholster that weapon in the presence of my detail, you will not survive the mistake. Now, are you the individual who initiated force against Commander Vance?" Maddox swallowed hard, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "This is a local jurisdiction matter. You can't just bring the military into a county station. I arrested him for resisting. He's in my custody. He is a Tier 1 asset of the United States Armed Forces," Lieutenant Commander Hayes interjected smoothly, stepping forward and opening his briefcase on the booking counter. "And you, officer, have just committed a gross violation of federal law, a direct breach of statutory protections, and the unlawful detention of a commissioned officer without color of law." "He was swerving," Maddox lied, his voice rising as panic took root. "I gave him a lawful command." Officer Thorne suddenly stood up from his desk in the corner. His face was white, his hands trembling, but his conscience had finally broken through the blue wall. "He wasn't swerving, Clint," Thorne said clearly, his voice ringing through the silent room. Maddox whipped his head around, his eyes wild with betrayal. "Shut up, Caleb. You're a rookie. You don't know." "The dash cam and body cam footage are already uploaded to the county server," Thorne continued, looking directly at Master Chief Stryker. The commander was fully compliant. He was simply adjusting his dress uniform coat when Officer Maddox deployed his taser without provocation. 2 full cycles. Stryker's jaw set into stone. He turned his gaze back to Maddox, who took an instinctive step back until his shoulder hit the drywall. "You tased a compliant Navy SEAL commander in his dress whites," Stryker stated, each word dripping with cold venom. "You fired a weapon into the back of a man who has given more to this country before breakfast than you will offer in your entire miserable life." I have union representation," Maddox stammered weakly, looking around for support that wasn't coming. "Your union," Hayes said, pulling a stack of stamped documents from his briefcase, "has exactly 0 standing before a federal magistrate, nor will it protect you from the Department of Defense. Sergeant, open that holding cell. Now." Connolly didn't hesitate. He grabbed the heavy ring of brass keys from the hook and practically sprinted down the corridor to cell 3, with Stryker, Hayes, and Thorne right behind him. Maddox remained rooted in the lobby, surrounded by the unblinking dark lenses of the tactical operators at the door. When Connolly unlocked the heavy iron gate, it swung open with a long metallic whine. Commander Malcolm Vance sat perfectly still on the concrete bench. His uniform was an absolute disaster, smeared with highway mud, torn at the shoulder where the taser prongs had ripped the fabric, and dark with dried blood at the temple. Yet his posture was flawless. He looked up, his expression entirely stoic, refusing to grant the physical trauma any real estate on his face. Master Chief Stryker immediately snapped to attention, his hand cutting the air in a razor-sharp salute. "Commander, apologies for the delay, sir." Malcolm stood up slowly. His right leg gave a slight, involuntary tremor, a residual firing of the nervous system, but he locked his knee, stood tall, and returned the salute. "Master Chief, good to see a friendly uniform," he said, his voice raw. He looked past Stryker to the JAG officer. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes, I assume you have the necessary documentation?" "Signed by a federal judge 15 minutes ago, sir," Hayes confirmed. "You're leaving with us." Malcolm stepped out of the cell, pausing as his eyes found Officer Thorne, who was looking at the floor in shame. "Officer Thorne," Malcolm said gently. The young cop looked up, bracing for anger. Instead, he found only a quiet, solemn respect. "Integrity is doing the right thing when the entire world is telling you to lie," Malcolm told him. "Remember this night. Don't let a bad cop's ghost define your career." Thorne nodded, a sheen of moisture in his eyes. "Thank you, sir. I'm so deeply sorry." Malcolm walked down the narrow hallway and re-entered the main lobby. The moment he appeared, the operators outside the glass snapped to rigid attention. Maddox was backed against the wall, hyperventilating as the walls of his reality closed in. Malcolm stopped in the center of the room. He didn't look angry. He looked profoundly disappointed, looking at Maddox the way one looks at a rabid animal. Something dangerous, but ultimately pathetic. "I told you, Officer Maddox," Malcolm said, his voice carrying an icy clarity. "I was unarmed. I was compliant. You let your ego dictate your training. You are not above the law." "You think you can just walk out of here?" Maddox spat, trying to salvage a shred of his shattered authority, though his knees were visibly shaking. Hayes stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. "No, Officer Maddox. He doesn't think it. We know it. But you are about to discover exactly how heavy the federal government can get." Before Maddox could respond, the front doors burst open again, and in rushed Chief of Police Warren Briggs. Briggs was an older man, his tie askew, breathing heavily after driving 80 miles an hour from his suburban home, after receiving a frantic alert from dispatch about a military siege at his precinct. Briggs stopped dead in his tracks, taking in the black-clad tactical team, the towering Master Chief, and the blood-stained Navy commander standing in the center of his bullpen. Finally, his eyes landed on Maddox, who looked ready to vomit. "What in God's name is happening in my precinct?" Briggs demanded. "Chief Briggs," Hayes said, stepping forward with his credentials out. "Your officer, Clint Maddox, conducted an unprovoked traffic stop, assaulted a commissioned naval officer, and unlawfully detained him. This is no longer a local administrative issue. We can handle this internally, Briggs said quickly, raising his hands in a defensive gesture. He knew Maddox was a walking liability. The town council had been trying to dump him for years, but the union had always blocked it. We'll open an internal affairs investigation immediately. There's no need for the military to occupy my station. An internal affairs investigation? Hayes let out a cold, humorless smile. Chief Briggs, you completely misunderstand the gravity of the situation. This isn't just a civil rights violation or a case of police brutality. Hayes turned to Malcolm. Commander, do you still possess the package? Malcolm reached his hand into the torn inner pocket of his ruined dress jacket. He pulled out a small, heavy, matte black titanium drive. It was no larger than a pack of gum, but the biometric sensor on its face was pulsing with a faint, crimson light. Briggs frowned. What is that? This, Chief Briggs, Hayes explained, his voice dropping into a deadly serious register, is a Level 7 encrypted Department of Defense transport drive. It contains the real-time deployment schedules, satellite communication protocols, and extraction coordinates for 3 active Special Operations units currently deployed in hostile territory overseas. The remaining color drained from Briggs's face. Even in a small county, a police chief knows that Level 7 and active overseas deployments are phrases that draw the attention of people who don't care about local ordinances. Commander Vance, Hayes continued, pacing the floor like a shark in shallow water, is the designated secure courier for this intelligence. He was moving it from a secure briefing to a secondary military facility. By federal statute, this drive must remain on his person, and his person must remain uncompromised. Hayes spun around, his finger snapping out to point directly at Maddox's chest. When your officer unlawfully forced Commander Vance from his vehicle, deployed a weapon against him, and locked him in a civilian holding cell, he didn't just assault a citizen. He actively compromised the physical security of classified national defense intelligence. Maddox's knees actually gave out this time. He grabbed the edge of a nearby desk to keep from hitting the floor. I didn't know anything about a drive. Ignorance is not a legal defense, officer, Stryker growled, stepping into Maddox's personal space. Ignorance of who you're dealing with is just a fatal error. Under the Espionage Act and federal security statutes, interfering with a military officer in the transport of classified material is a major felony, Hayes stated with surgical precision. By rendering Commander Vance physically incapacitated on an unsecured public corridor, you created a critical vulnerability where state secrets could have been intercepted. You're bluffing, Maddox whispered, a tear of pure panic escaping his eye. It was just a traffic stop. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Naval Criminal Investigative Service were notified the exact second the commander missed his secure check-in window, Hayes said, checking his watch. In fact, Chief Briggs, if you look through your window, you'll see them arriving now. Through the coastal fog outside, 2 black unmarked SUVs pulled into the lot, pinning the police cruisers against the curb. 4 men and 2 women in dark suits and windbreakers bearing the letters FBI and NCIS stepped out, moving with an undeniable purpose toward the doors. Briggs realized in a single, terrifying flash that his precinct, his career, and his town were about to be swallowed whole by the federal government. The Union couldn't save Maddox from a federal grand jury. Nobody could. Briggs turned on Maddox, his eyes burning with absolute rage. "Clint," he said, his voice shaking, "give me your badge. Give me your sidearm. Now." "Chief, come on. The Union can't keep you out of a federal penitentiary," Briggs roared, spittle flying from his lips. "You compromised national security because you wanted to play the big man on a dark highway. Badge and gun on the desk, right now." With trembling fingers, Maddox unclipped his duty belt. It hit the linoleum floor with a heavy, pathetic thud. He unpinned the silver shield from his chest and dropped it onto the counter. In less than an hour, Clint Maddox had gone from an arrogant bully with a badge to an unemployed civilian facing decades in federal custody. The front door swung open again, and the federal agents flooded the lobby, their credentials displayed clearly. Special Agent Vance, no, Special Agent Miller, NCIS, the lead investigator said, taking in the scene and stopping when his eyes found Malcolm's ruined uniform. "Commander Vance, are you secure?" "I am secure, Agent Miller," Malcolm replied calmly. "Take him," Miller said, gesturing toward Maddox. Two FBI agents grabbed Maddox by his arms, spinning him around and slamming him against the cinder-block wall. They roughly kicked his legs apart, the exact same movement Maddox had demanded of Malcolm an hour prior. The sharp metallic click of federal handcuffs echoed through the room as they locked tightly around his wrists. "Clint Maddox, you are under arrest for the assault of a federal officer, unlawful detention, and gross negligence in the protection of classified national defense materials," the agent recited, pulling him away from the wall. As they led Maddox toward the exit, he passed directly in front of Malcolm. Maddox was weeping now, his bravado completely shattered, reduced to a hollow, terrified shell of a man. Malcolm looked at him one final time. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. "You demanded respect tonight, Maddox," Malcolm said, his voice low and incredibly steady. "But respect is earned through discipline and service. You have neither. You are a disgrace to the shield you wore." Maddox couldn't even lift his head to meet his eyes. The agents escorted him out into the cold, damp night, shoving him into the back of the unmarked vehicle. Master Chief Stryker turned to Malcolm. "Sir, the medical transport is waiting to check that head wound." Malcolm nodded deliberately, placing the titanium drive securely back into his inner pocket. He cast a final look around the quiet precinct, offering a nod of acknowledgement to Officer Thorne, who stood alone by the desks. "Let's go home, Master Chief," Malcolm said. Flanked by his JAG officer and the towering Master Chief, Commander Malcolm Vance walked out of the precinct house. The heavy steel doors of the Bearcat hissed open to receive him. As the armored convoy backed out of the lot, their brilliant light bars cutting through the lingering fog, they left behind a broken department and a permanent reminder that true power does not need to shout. True power simply acts. By 8 o'clock the following morning, the quiet county seat was effectively under federal occupation. The story hadn't yet reached the national press, but within the networks of law enforcement and the Department of Defense, the shockwave was absolute. Highway 17 had been cordoned off by federal investigators, meticulously photographing the gravel shoulder where Malcolm's blood and the copper taser wires still lay. At the precinct, the doors were locked to the public. The FBI and the Department of Justice had seized every server, hard drive, and personnel file in the building. Chief Briggs was forced to sit in his own conference room while federal auditors dismantled his department's history, pulling up a decade of buried complaints and systemic misconduct. The real battle, however, was taking place 90 miles away in a secure conference room at the federal courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia. Clint Maddox had been denied bail. He sat in a bright orange jumpsuit, his wrists shackled to the heavy oak table, looking small and pale. Beside him sat Arthur Croft, a high-powered attorney funded by the Police Benevolent Association, known for pulling bad cops out of impossible situations. Across the table sat Lieutenant Commander Hayes and United States Attorney Sarah Jenkins, a woman with a legendary conviction rate and an absolute intolerance for institutional corruption. "This is an absurd overreach," Croft argued, slamming his palm onto the wood. "My client made an error in judgment during a high-stress traffic stop. It's a civil rights issue at worst. Bringing up the Espionage Act is a theatrical stunt designed to intimidate a local patrolman." U.S. Attorney Jenkins didn't blink. She slowly opened a thick manila folder, sliding out a single sheet of paper bearing the embossed seal of the Secretary of Defense. "Mr. Croft," Jenkins began, her voice a chillingly calm monotone. Are you familiar with the legal definition of constructive compromise regarding national security information? Croft shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I am, but my client didn't steal anything. He didn't look at any data. He tased a man who happened to have a drive in his pocket. Lieutenant Commander Hayes leaned forward, the lights reflecting off his glasses. He spoke with the precision of a prosecutor who had already mapped out the verdict. It wasn't a pocket device, Mr. Croft, Hayes corrected sharply. It was a Level 7 biometric secure transport drive. And your client didn't just tase a man. He rendered the designated federal courier unconscious on an unsecured public highway for exactly 4 minutes and 22 seconds. Hayes slid 3 high-resolution photographs across the table. Exhibit A, a time-stamped still from Officer Thorne's body cam showing the commander convulsing on the ground, completely incapacitated. Exhibit B, a satellite analysis of that stretch of road, showing a dense tree line less than 50 yards away, an ideal location for a foreign collection asset. Exhibit C, a redacted intelligence brief. Hayes leaned closer. During those 4 minutes, the operational security of 3 active units was compromised. If an adversarial asset had been tracking Commander Vance, which is a threat matrix we monitor daily, your client hand-delivered them a 4-minute window to execute the commander and take the drive. That is the literal definition of gross negligence under federal law. Croft looked at the photos, then at Maddox, who was visibly trembling. You can't prove there were foreign agents in those woods. We don't have to, Jenkins countered smoothly. The statute only requires us to prove that his reckless, unlawful actions created the vulnerability, which they did. Furthermore, we have the audio of your client explicitly fabricating a threat to justify force. He's reaching. We all heard it. Croft tried one final, desperate bluff. If you take this to a public trial, I will subpoena Commander Vance. I'll put his entire service record under a microscope. The media will turn this into a circus, and the military hates bad press. A low, rumbling chuckle echoed from the shadows near the door. Vice Admiral Charles Sterling stepped into the light, his 4-star uniform immaculate, his presence radiating an absolute, unyielding authority. Mr. Croft, Sterling said, his voice vibrating through the room like distant artillery. Do you truly believe the United States Navy fears a public trial regarding one of its most decorated operators? Commander Vance holds 2 silver stars. He pulled 3 wounded men from a downed airframe under fire in Kandahar. He is bulletproof. The public will build monuments to him. Sterling leaned over the table, his eyes completely devoid of mercy. If you fight this, we won't just convict your client. We will drag your entire department, your union, and your state leadership into the bright light of a federal courtroom. We will make Clint Maddox the national poster child for federal prosecution of corrupt police. We are offering a plea today. He takes 20 years in a federal facility, or we go to trial, and Ms. Jenkins seeks life without the possibility of parole. Choose. Maddox let out a choked sob, burying his face in his shackled hands, the chains rattling against the oak. The arrogance was entirely gone. He was finally face to face with a power structure he could neither bully nor escape. Croft looked at his client, then at the U.S. attorney, and slowly closed his briefcase. Give us the agreement, he whispered. 6 months later, the heavy oak doors of the federal district court swung open to a barrage of flashing media cameras. Former officer Clint Maddox, stripped of his badge, his pension, and his freedom, was led out in leg irons and handcuffs by 2 U.S. Marshals. He looked a decade older, his hair graying at the temples. The judge had just accepted his guilty plea, delivering a swift sentence. 22 years at the United States Penitentiary in Leavenworth, a maximum security facility. There would be no early parole. The system he had turned into a personal weapon had finally turned around and consumed him. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere remained solemn. Malcolm Vance, fully recovered and dressed once more in his pristine white uniform, sat in the front row. The Navy Cross on his chest gleamed under the gallery lights. He hadn't gloated during the sentencing. He had simply watched justice take its course with the quiet stoicism of a man who understood that actions always carry a receipt. As Malcolm walked down the marble steps of the courthouse, flanked by Stryker and Hayes, a young man in a neat, tailored suit stepped out from the crowd. It was Caleb Thorne. Thorne had resigned from the county force the morning after the incident. His choice to speak the truth had made him an outcast among the old guard of the county, but it had preserved his honor. "Commander Vance," Thorne said, stepping forward nervously. Malcolm stopped, offering a firm, respectful nod. "Mr. Thorne, it's good to see you. I wanted to thank you, sir," Thorne said, his voice tight with emotion. "And I wanted to apologize again for my part in that night. I should have stepped in sooner. I should have stopped his hand before he fired." Malcolm studied the young man, seeing the lingering weight of the event, but also the unmistakable steel of a corrected path. "You stepped into the light when it counted, Caleb," Malcolm said, his tone softening, losing the sharp edge of military command. "You chose the truth when a man with a badge told you to lie. That takes a rare kind of courage. Don't let one dark night define the rest of your horizon." Thorne nodded, swallowing hard. "I won't, sir. Actually, the Bureau reached out to me. U.S. Attorney Jenkins put in a word. I start at the FBI Academy in Quantico next month." A genuine warm smile broke across Malcolm's face, and he extended his large right hand. "Then I expect you to be exactly the kind of agent this republic needs. Congratulations." Thorne shook the commander's hand with a firm, renewed grip. "I won't let you down, sir." Malcolm turned and walked down the final flight of steps toward a waiting black SUV. The afternoon breeze caught the edge of his white coat, the gold trident catching the sharp glare of the sun. Master Chief Stryker held the door open for him. "Good day for the rule of law, sir," Stryker said. "It's a day for accountability, Master Chief," Malcolm replied, sliding into the rear seat. "Let's get back to the base. We have a deployment brief at 1800, and I don't intend to keep the team waiting." As the SUV pulled away from the curb, leaving the media circus and the ruined life of Clint Maddox behind, Malcolm looked out the tinted glass. He thought about the flashing lights in his mirror 6 months ago, the cold gravel, and the sudden shock of the wires. But he also thought about the unyielding foundation of the oath he had taken, to protect the Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. Sometimes those enemies wore foreign uniforms, and sometimes they hid behind a local shield of unearned authority. Malcolm Vance had proven that a uniform does not command respect. It merely represents the commitment to earn it every single day. He had met the worst of domestic cowardice with the absolute best of military discipline, and the chain of command had held fast. It had proven entirely unbreakable. This story isn't just about a clash between two uniforms. It's a powerful reminder of what true strength looks like. In a world where people often mistake a loud voice or a badge of authority for real power, Commander Malcolm Vance showed us that the ultimate test of character is restraint. When an unchecked ego pushed him into the dirt, he didn't lower himself to that level. He relied on his discipline, his honor, and an unwavering faith in accountability. True power doesn't need to bully, intimidate, or shout to prove itself. It stands steady, acts with integrity, and lets justice do the talking. It's a lesson for all of us. Your position doesn't demand respect. It's your actions every single day that earn it. If this story reminded you of the weight of true leadership, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and share what accountability means to you. And if you want to stay tuned for more gripping stories of justice and integrity, hit that subscribe button and join our community. Your support keeps these stories alive.